Okay, kia ora everybody. Kia ora. You can reply, it's totally fine. Kia ora everybody. Kia ora. We're going to, Haere Tonu, we're going to continue on as we started last week. So we're going to start with the karakia. So if everyone wants to eat too, everyone wants to stand up. It's the same karakia as last week. So I know you've all been diligently practicing since last week. So again, we're just going to say the part in bold lettering, okay? There's too many akes on the end there, so just skip one. There's only meant to be 3, okay? Just a test, because you all picked that up from last week, didn't you? Yeah. Okay, so on fa, toru, fa. He hore, he karoria, ki te atua. He maunga rongo, ki te whenua. He whakaro pai, ki ngā tangata katoa. Ake, 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 amen. Awesome. Stay standing. We're going to do our waiata. Same waiata from last week. Again, I'll say the stuff that's not in bold, and then you just basically say the stuff in bold straight after me, okay? All good? Nice and loud singing voices, just like you would in church, okay? Nice and confident. Or maybe you wouldn't. So you should. Okay, toru fa. Oh, e toru ngā mea. E toru ngā mea. Ngā mea nunui. Ngā mea nunui. E ki ana. E ki ana. Te pai pera. Te pai pera. Whakapono. Whakapono. Tūmanako. Tūmanako. Ko te mea nui. Ko te mea nui. Everyone, ko te aroha. Awesome, e noho whānau. E noho. So, tuatahi, me mihi ka tika ki te atua ki tō kātau papa, te kaihanga o ngā mea katoa. Ka toro atu aku ranga ki aia, moana tēnei tauwherotanga. Kua uhia mai ki rungi a tātou. Nā tātou I whakahuihui. He oi, he horere ki tōnei mua tapu. Ai e taunei ki rungi a tātou katoa te wairua tapu. Nā ihu karaiti, I whakatakoto, te ara tika, hei hiko ai tanga mā tātou ana uri. Tuarua, he mihi tēnei ki te mana whenua o te rohe nei, ko ngai tua huriri, ko te mana whenua tua rohe nei, tēnā koutou katoa. Tēnā koutou, kia koutou katoa, e te whānui o te kaupapa nei, kua huhui mai, ki ko nei ki te kōrero tahi, wānanga tahi, ako tahi, o tēnei kaupapa hira hira. Kia ora everyone. So again, as you would have remembered from last week, this is on, eh? Yeah. Okay, great. I just did a welcome, just did a mihi to our God, the creator of all things, the creator of heaven and earth, and said some other things too. And so welcome to you all tonight. What's that? What were the other things? The other things were, okay, it's just like a test, okay. Something about the Holy Spirit being upon us, Jesus laying the way for us to walk in his footsteps. And then I acknowledge the mana whenua of this region, who's Ngai Tua Huriri, who knows where Ngai Tua Huriri are based? You can answer. Tuahiwi, nice, the mana whenua, who are one of the hapu out of from Kaitahu, as part of Kaitahu. And then I just welcomed you all to this kaupapa that we can kind of talk together and wānanga together and learn together. That's pretty much what I said. Yeah. So I think that's all I have to do right now, actually, which is actually really good. And so John is going to come up and he's going to... and just a special welcome also to those who weren't here last week as well. So John is going to give us a bit of a recap of what we touched on last week, but just want to say a special mention to those who weren't here last week as well. Sure.
Yeah. So kia ora, welcome. Welcome back, and those of you who weren't maybe your first week here, weren't this last week, welcome to you as well. My name is Jonathan. I'm the minister here at Linwood Avenue Union Church. And why are we doing this? Why have we invited you? Why have you come? Why did I have this idea? And that was for a number of reasons, but one was that my whole training as a youth worker, and then as a training for ordination and ministry, and then coming into my first parish here, all along that track, I have been learning and coaxed along on this journey of biculturalism and encouraged to use Te Reo Māori and everything that we're doing, and which has been which is great. But then I come into a setting and realize that, okay, while I've been moving at this pace and everyone alongside of me is moving at this pace, not all the churches have caught up to this pace. Some are here for it, some aren't, some just aren't really sure. And I realize that some of my approach hasn't been maybe as I haven't explained my invitation to joining me on where I am in the journey and coming along together as a church, maybe as well as I had hoped I was doing. And so I thought, I can't do that on a Sunday. I want to have a chance to sit down with some people and have some real deep conversations around this, and I need some friends to help me do that. And the treaty is the heart of all of that. And so this is why I've invited you to gather here tonight. And so that is what we're doing. Last week we didn't get into any of the meat, so to speak. Last week we took things slow. We did everything in sort of a Māori tikanga approach of getting to know each other a little bit first, stating what it is we're actually here and hoping for and wanting to get out of all this stuff, and laying sort of groundwork and just kind of prepping ourselves for tonight. And next week, but remember, not next week. Remember, next week we're off. We're coming back on week 4 and week 5 of February. So tonight we're going to get into some things for real, and I just want to reiterate that this is meant to be a safe space, and people are all on different parts of their journey with this, and if we're moving too fast, if anyone's moving too fast, put your hand up and say, I don't know what that means. I'll explain that. And if you have heard, everyone will have come with a little bit of an expectation, or probably even we're coming with a lens of which we see things through. We're coming with biblical lenses, we're coming with cultural lenses, we're coming with personal lenses, all that sort of stuff. We talked a little bit end of last week. And all of that feeds into how we interpret and understand and hear even the treaty. So, to Tiriti. So, we want to be able to hear an expose of what everyone sort of thinks and knows, or what they want to know. So don't be afraid to ask questions. We will do some group talk and things, so some things can be hammered out a bit easier. And just want to reiterate that there will be, you may feel an array of emotions as we talk about some of these things, and that, we want you to feel those feelings, and that's fine. We want you to express whatever you're feeling, whatever you're, as you're learning something new or dealing with something. And I guess that's kind of our kaupapa. When we got together, Bruce and Dallas and I, the main thing we asked ourselves is, what do we want people to get out of this? And we said we want people to leave each week having learned something and coming back to want to learn more. So that, I think, covers the why, the recap. And so we will get into some things now.
And also, just to add to what Jono's saying, we are intentionally, but also just acknowledging that even we here have a limited expertise and knowledge. And I know, having had a teaching background, that in mainstream Western education, we tend to want the answer to everything. But that is not what we are aiming to do. We're not aiming to give you answers, because if anyone has done any kind of diving into any subject really, but especially history, it's always going to be dependent on who the one is that's telling the history, right? And what sources we're looking at, and what the dominant narratives are, and who the dominant voices are, and what books we're choosing to read or not to read. So there's just so many reasons as to why we wanted to approach it in a way where we're saying, here's an offering, here's some things that we want to put before you. Good luck on your journey. Go and do some more learning. However, you know, in saying that, we are wanting to put things before you that hopefully do give you some sense of, okay, I've learned something. I'm taking something away. So, you know, there's a bit of a nuance there. So, like last week, if you weren't here last week, what we did is we got into small groups just to kind of get our arero. Our arero is our tongues, our waha is our mouths, to get those going, to get our hinengaros, our minds, our thoughts, get all of it going. Because as Jono said, we really want this thing to be a whole kind of wānanga. Everyone gets to have some input and kōrero talking in it. So, to start us off, here's two questions. One of them is a bit more straightforward. How did you spend Waitangi Day? So just have a conversation about that. The next one is, do you think God got off the boat with the missionaries? God of the Bible. Here we go. Go for it, whānau. So groups of, let's say 4 or 5. Totally up to you. Turn your chairs around, make yourself comfortable. You're going to be maybe 10 minutes in this, and that's max. Yep. Okay, whānau, we're going to do one more minute, okay? One more minute. 7:30. Okay, everybody. This is where I need like a... All right, I overheard some really good meaty conversations or kōrero going on. So again, in the spirit of us all learning together, or us being teachers and learners at the same time, would anyone from any group like to share? We're interested in what you did for Waitangi Day. I'm more interested in where you went to with the second question. So is anyone feeling brave and courageous? Kia kaha, kia maia. I heard someone in the room talking about a white saviour complex. I did hear that. Well, I didn't say it. I just repeated it. Oh, yeah.
We thought that he was already here.
Yeah.
Wait, hold on.
Oh, sorry, yeah, we
need
need
a
a mic.
microphone.
Because we're recording. Oh, sorry, forgot to say again. We are recording again tonight. That doesn't mean to say you have to think.
Kia ora. Our group thought and felt that God is already here and he is already everywhere. So, yes, he didn't get off the boat, but what leaked off the boat was the Bible. And that was an interesting way of thinking about it.
Yeah. Awesome. Anyone else? Yeah.
I think some of us think that God did get off the boat and stayed on the boat and was everywhere else as well, and was before and later and all the rest. And I still have a bit of trouble with limiting God to a he, but I don't think God's a she. I think God's much more than that. And I think the Maori people understood that and received it better than a lot of other people.
And that might be a wee nod to the worldview kōrero that we were having last week. Yes.
Which you missed.
Oh, true.
Yeah.
There you go, you've already arrived. You didn't need to come last week. Does anyone else on this side want to share something that may not have already been said?
No. I was just going to quote what Sean Louis said. He
who's already here. Awesome. Thank you for that. So, yep, I'm going to hand it over to Bruce.
Kia ora koutou. So I introduced myself last week and told you, as you probably noticed, my accent is American. I told you a bit about my ancestry, 400 years in America. Many of my ancestors owned slaves on plantations. Some fought and died to protect the right to own human beings in the Civil War. Some of my ancestors fought against the natives of North America, both in Canada and all along the East Coast. And today you will have a hard time finding Native Americans along the East Coast because they were all pushed west to where there was more land that was undesirable over time. That was kind of my backstory. In fact, I learned when I was researching my whakapapa that my river is the James River, named after the same King James that we get the King James Bible is named after. The same one, James River. But it had a name before that. It was the Powhatan River, named for the chief of the Powhatan Indians who had been living all around that river before my ancestors arrived and renamed it to the James River. So just that's sort of the backdrop of my story. And for me personally, I found that very disconcerting to step away from just a history book to my ancestry and realizing how uncomfortable I felt with the fact that this was my blood, my ancestors who did this. I have ancestors of both English and Scottish descent, so I can claim to be both oppressor and oppressed. It's always a bonus if you get a little bit of the oppressed side in there. It should have given us a better understanding of what the natives were experiencing when we came into their country and took possession of their land. But it gives me appreciation for, there's a better story here in New Zealand. And I say that in all honesty. I've never heard stories like the ones I've heard about in New Zealand, told about American Christians or Canadians who arrived. I'm sure there are some, and I'm sure there's small pockets of it. There were certainly some good people, but there's a redemptive arc, I think, in the story of New Zealand that I really, really hope the Christians embrace. And this question drives home one of the first really powerful stories that just hit me from the history of this land. How many of you, I already had one little spoiler in our group, somebody mentioned a prophet, Toiroa the prophet. So I see some heads nodding, a few of you know the name. So Toiroa was I have to admit, I'm not the most knowledgeable person in the room on some of these topics, but just this is my understanding of it so far. I've already been corrected a few times in the stories that I've shared over the last couple of weeks. Happy to be corrected where I'm wrong. So Toiroa, 3 years before the first missionaries, colonists arrived on the shores of New Zealand, started having some visions and some dreams and started sharing those with his people, and he was having a hard time explaining them. So he started drawing in the sand and fashioning some artifacts out of harakeke and other equipment. He made things that looked like the ships that would arrive. He took a, what is it called? Yeah, that thing, sorry. And he slid it and then sewed up the legs to look like pants. He fashioned a hat in the style of the colonists. He even fashioned a smoking pipe, like something that was unknown. But he also had a number of things to say about these people that were coming. And the one that really smacked me upside the head was when I first heard this one. I'm going to read to you. So this is from Judith Binney's book. I should also briefly mention there's a bunch of books back there on that table which you're welcome to look at but not to take with you because they're my personal books. But take a picture of them so you can go get them yourself. This is about the life of Tikoti, who was another prophet in a later time. But at the beginning of the book, she writes about Toiroa. And the prophecy that she records, just in the interest of time, I won't read the te reo. Also, I'm tired, and I'll probably start messing it up. I'd rather not do that. But in any case, the prophecy that he said translates to something like this. There's a new God coming. His name is son who was killed. He's a good God, but the people will still be oppressed, is her translation in that book. Now, I've also had my dear friend tell me that the word actually more accurately means lost. I'm not sure exactly what that does to the interpretation of it, but can you hear? 3 years before they arrived, he said, the son who was killed was coming, and he was good, but bad things would still happen to the people. Whew. Get your head around that one. And so it just fills me with hope that this question is answered by the fact that God made himself known on this land before the missionaries, before the settlers, before any of those arrived. He made himself known. And we know from Romans, too, that he was already making himself known. We had a bit of a discussion about, somebody said that when Maori arrived off the Waka, some went up on the hill and worshipped the Creator God. I've not heard that story, so I can't verify it myself, but that's interesting to think about. But not quite simultaneous, but there's another story that is also really interesting and I think is very redemptive, and especially for those of us of Pakeha descent. There was something happening across the ocean back in England. Have any of you heard of this guy named William Wilberforce? Yeah, okay, good. Most of you have heard of William Wilberforce, very strongly advocating for the abolition of slavery. For more than 20 years, he worked in Parliament to slowly chip away at the foundations until it could eventually be abolished. But William Wilberforce did this because he was a part of a group of very committed Christians who gathered together and asked themselves a really profound question. What difference does our faith make in the world today? What difference does our faith make in how we treat people? What difference does our faith make in how we engage in the economy? What difference does it have with how we teach literacy? What difference does it make in how we treat animals? This group of people that William Wilberforce was connected to was known as the Clapham sect. And there are many famous people who went on to do some incredible things in English society to transform it in various areas. And there were economists, and the RSPCA was set up out of that group. Bible schools were created to teach literacy for the first time by that group, establishing them and beginning a movement. But, so that group continued. It was a very small group, only about 40 people at its peak were a part of this group, but they had a profound influence on all of Western society for the better. One of the things that they turned their attention to, as it was evident that slavery was now finally on its last legs and that they were near to winning that battle, they were starting to look for what's the next front that we really need to engage in. And what this group, the Clapham sect, decided was the next front was the protection of indigenous rights. See, by this time, they'd already had nearly 200 years of history in the Americas of seeing what had happened there, and as some a shorter history in Australia as well. And so as they were approaching, as missionaries were beginning to think about coming to New Zealand, they were considering, what can we do differently than what we've done before? How can we do better as Christians? And they decided that the next thing to engage in was the protection of indigenous rights. So that was a very strong thread in what the group got up to and how it influenced their thinking over the next several generations. And in fact, you can see that some of those people were very active. James Stephen was one of the founding members of the Clapham sect, and his son, James Stephen, worked in the British forgetting the exact name, but essentially the Office for Protection of the Colonies. And Lord Normanby was the head of it, but Lord Normanby wanted some instructions sent along with Hobson on what to do as they were thinking about establishing a treaty here to protect the rights of the indigenous peoples of this country. Knowing that there's a whole lot of complexity in the world, The French were starting to show up. English were already here. There was already, almost 2,000 people in New Zealand before the treaty. And some of them were up to no good. A lot, we just read the stories of early Russell, or the Bay of Islands. Not pretty what was going on up there, called by Darwin, I think, the hellhole of the Pacific. It was a pretty nasty place and not much control by the British over their own citizens. And Maori didn't feel like they had the right to impose their own tribal laws on people outside their tribe, strangely enough. Yeah, strangely enough. So I just want to read you briefly from another book. The instructions were quite long, and there's this great book right here. It is quite a meaty tome. The title is not gripping, the English text of the Treaty of Waitangi. But man, it is packed full of good information on how the British changed their approach to making treaties and covenants in the early to mid 1800s, the particular time period where ours is established. And he captures this quote that was written down by James Stephen. It was drafted, and it was approved by Lord Normanby to be sent as part of the instructions. Now, this is just a part of the instructions, but I want to read to you here. It says in the instructions, they, speaking of the Maori, must not be permitted to enter into any contracts in which they might be ignorant and unintended authors of injuries to themselves. You will not, for example, purchase from them any territory, the retention of which by them would be essential or highly conducive to their own comfort, safety, or subsistence. The acquisition of land by the Crown for the future settlement of British subjects must be confined to such districts as the natives can alienate without distress or serious inconvenience to themselves. To secure the observance of this will be one of the first duties of their official protection. Well, how many of you heard that story before? Probably a few of you have come across it by now, because Ned Fletcher's book has really resonated. Ned Fletcher's book is being quoted by non-Christian. He happens to be a Christian, but it's not written from the perspective of a Christian. It's written as a historical account. So it's being quoted by secular and non-secular people alike, and sometimes referencing these quotes like this. So what does that say to us? There was something going on. There were people who moved by the Spirit of God to do something better. And I hope that we, as people of God, can be moved by the Spirit of God to do something better than what we've inherited from the past. It's going to be hard work to figure out what that is. We have to do a lot of really hard discussions about unpicking some of the past and unpicking what is an appropriate response. But we've got to get comfortable with being uncomfortable and kind of digging into the hard issues and not letting the fact that they're hard put us off from diving into them. So for me, this was just two stories that kind of set the stage of how God was at work. And there's so many more we could certainly dive into. In fact, we've invited Aidan to come with us today, who's going to dive into a bit more of what happened after that. And you'll get to actually hear a non-Māori Kiwi voice. So proof that we're not all just foreigners coming in here to tell you how to do things. So I think it's, we'll go to Aidan now. I don't know if this got turned off, but. All right, this was just a bit of what Dallas said earlier about the Wānanga that we're going through, and then we're going to jump into, I'll hand this over to Aidan. Do you want this back in here?
Oh, kia ora. I already know some of you, your friends that I've already acquainted with, but some of you are new friends as well. So I wanted to talk about God's woven story, and we've already talked about how God was already here. But I wanted to talk about the South Island strand. And I was just looking at your thing here, just how